Body Wrappers Angelo Luzio is happy to be the sponsor of this episode of Conversations on Dance. Body Wrappers Angelo Luzio is known for its fine, total stretch tights and Angelo Luzio shoes, and has Tyler Peck, principal dancer with the New York City Ballet, as its spokesperson and designer for the Tyler Peck Designs for Premiere. It takes a dancer who lives in a leotard 8 hours a day to know what is best in a leotard, so Tyler's original leotard fits perfectly, are ideal for class, rehearsal, or performance, and are beautiful, move well with the body, and won't ride up in the back. September means back to school and dance classes. Body Wrappers makes additional apparel for all types of dance that include ballet, jazz, modern, lyrical, hip-hop, tap, team, liturgical, performance wear for competition and recital, as well as Angelo Luzio shoes. You may view all of their products at bodywrappers.com, or to purchase Tyler Peck Designs by Body Wrappers, go to dancewearcorner.com. I'm Rebecca King-Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance.
This week, we are joined by Susan Pilarre, esteemed teacher at the School of American Ballet, repetiteur for the Balanchine Trust, and former New York City Ballet soloist. Suzy, as her students, friends, and family call her, joined the New York City Ballet under George Balanchine's direction at the age of 15. She spent 16 years in the company, premiering in many of his most important works and eventually rising to the rank of soloist. She has remained a keeper of the Balanchine flame ever since, officially joining the staff of the School of American Ballet in 1986. Ms. Pillare also stages Balanchine's works throughout the world as a representative of the Balanchine Trust. Her daughter Zoe, a former Miami City Ballet dancer and repetiteur, appeared on Conversations on Dance just last week. Today we talk with Suzy about her first encounters with Balanchine, her career dancing for him, how she got her position at the School of American Ballet, and about her passion for continuing to pass on her knowledge to future generations of School of American Ballet students.
We're so happy to be doing this with you in person, Suzy. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really our pleasure to have you here today.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
All right, we're just going to get started at the beginning. So how did you first become exposed to ballet?
Oh, I don't know. I think I took classes at, the local Dottie Dinkle Ballet School. I think my mother was a band singer in the 40s, and she was very musical, and she moved very well, and we had a lot of music in the house, so I imagine I danced around some. And so I went to this local school where they did everything. I don't think I did more than ballet. I did a little jazz. I know I have a movie of myself doing a jazz calypso number in a bumblebee costume. When I was 6, I think I was the star of the recital. We used to have the recital in the movie theater in my local town. But real ballet, I imagine I remember going to see the Bolshoi at the Old Met, famous Russians doing spring waters and things like that. But my first real, because the woman's sister who owned the local ballet school was a Rockette, and that was the big thing. We'd go to Radio City. But Melissa Hayden, it was so fortunate. She and her husband, Don Coleman, opened a ballet school in my town when I was 8. And they did she and Jacques D'Amboise came and did a demonstration at my local temple. And they did like 3 patadas or something. And that's the first time I was like, oh, wow, Mom, I have to go to this school. Can I please go to this school? And she said, well, we're paid up at the other school for the rest of the year. And I said, oh, please, can I go? So she let me go. So that's when I really became aware of, I think, the real thing.
At what point did you begin to attend class at the School of American Ballet?
So what happened was, again, life is just full of fortunate accidents, or not fortunate accidents, but in this case, fortunate that the school didn't do that well. And Melissa would come and teach maybe once a month, but she had wonderful teachers there, Frank Hobie and Michael Mall. Frank Hobie was a principal in New York City Ballet, and his wife, Ruth Anna Boris, and Michael Mall was in ABT, and I mean, I didn't know anything. I just knew they liked me and I liked them. But then the school folded, and Melissa took me by the hand and deposited me here to Madame Tchaikovsky in 4th Division. And I didn't audition or anything. She just gave me to her, and that was it. And so I was here from, I guess, a 10 and a half or something like that. And that's how I came here.
So when did you sort of become aware of the greater components? Like what SAB was attached to?
Well, you know, I was in those days, we didn't have a lot of children's ballets. Mr. B, we had Nutcracker, and that was it. And I also was in a ballet called Medea. It was done by Birgit Kullberg from Sweden, came and did Medea for Melissa and Jacques, and then Violette Verdi was the princess. And so my friend Delia Peters and I, we were the 2 children that she murdered. And so oddly enough, you know, the ballet was on at City Center. I guess it was probably in 59. And it was on the program with 7 Deadly Sins all the time. It was a very dramatic evening, I imagine. I didn't know any different, but so I got to see some pretty great things. And then I was here, but I wasn't here because I didn't live in Manhattan. You know, my mother would drive me in. It was like 3 or 4 times a week, and I would take late class. There used to be late C and late B. And so, you know, we'd drive in from Long Island until I could take the Long Island Railroad by myself. And so I wasn't taking as many classes as the kids that lived here and took morning class. But then when I was right before my sophomore year, we had a thing called special class, which was eventually became C2, but it was taught by Dubrovska exclusively. And then we had the other teachers too on other days. And so that meant that I had to take morning class. So I begged my parents if I could possibly go to professional children's school, which was, you know, a great deal of money at that time. And I'd have to take the train early in the morning to go to PCS so I could take morning class. But that worked out, and I was able to do that. And so I started that in September of my sophomore year. And then I was in the company in January of my sophomore year. So it was a pretty wild ride, and I have to say I was completely clueless. I was happy, but I didn't even know what was going on. It was different in those days, very, very different.
Do you have an early memory of Balanchine, either meeting him or seeing him?
Well, yeah, I remember. Well, the story is that, and it's true, that we were at the old school, which is where Barnes and Noble on Broadway is now, and there was a Pedro and Olga's ballroom studio. You went up this big stairway, which would be the second floor of Barnes and Noble, and to the left was Pedro and Olga's, and to the right was the School of American Ballet. And so the studios, you entered, there was a balcony that you could stand and look. The studios were down the steps. They were like in what would be the middle floor, the mezzanine of Barnes & Noble. But very high ceilings all the way to the top. And Mr. B used to come in and stand and on the balcony and look around. And, you know, all the girls were so nervous, and yeah, okay. And then one day, we had Andrei Glevsky was a wonderful teacher, and I think he liked me because I could jump very well. And Mr. B came in, and he literally put me in front of him because Mr. B sat down. He came down the steps, and he sat by the piano, which was on the side of the room, and he put me in front of him, and he gave 16 entrechatsis, and I could do them. And I got into the company that day, but I didn't, and I wasn't an apprentice, actually, because a whole bunch of girls had been apprentices. They had been at the school longer. I mean, they'd been taking morning class much longer, and they were in Spanish and Nutcracker. That's what the apprentices, and they still do that. And a whole bunch of girls that were in my class. And so after that class, we went to lunch at PCS. They had a cafeteria of sorts, and people were congratulating the apprentice girls that they had gotten into the company. And I said, congratulations. And somebody said to me, congratulations to you. You're in the company. And I said, I'm in the what? You're in the company. I said, no, that can't be. I just, no. So when I went back to the school, I asked Madame Russo and Madame Gleboff. Somebody told me I was in the company, and they said, oh, yes, we forgot to tell you, Mr. Balanchine would like you to join the company. That's how things were in those days. It was different. And so I was. So I wasn't an apprentice. I was directly in the company right away, and along with the girls who had been apprentices.
So then what were some of the ballets you started to dance?
Well, my first time I ever really danced on the stage, other than the children's ballets that I did, was, second movement, Symphony in C. There I was in the corps, but we did, I remember, because I was in City Center for a year. This was like end of 63 or something like that. And so I was there for a year before we moved, and we did, Symphony in C, Western, Firebird, of course. That was the classic matinee show. Swan Lake, Firebird, Afternoon of a Faun, and Western. That was, But, everything, Stars, and then they brought back Four Temperaments when I was at City Center, and I had, understudied it. I wasn't in it. And then this girl that, she was injured, and so, they put me in it, and that was like a big deal because, you had to count it and everything, and I guess I did okay. So a lot of great ballets. The repertoire was much smaller, but they were all pretty great.
What were some other, what was the company really like at that point? What were the things that made an impression on you? I mean,
well, I have to say I was really so young, and so I wasn't really, I was just doing my thing and rehearsing, and I remember if I was exhausted, there was a candy machine there, and I would get a Milky Way before the performance at night. And I still lived in Long Island, and my father would come pick me up after the show at City Center and drive me home. So I was just, and then I'd get up early and get on the train and get to school for 8 o'clock. So it was, I guess I was tired, but so the company, we were the first group of a group of younger people, and I think a lot of the and maybe we were wild and carried on, and maybe the older girls looked at us, calm down, and I don't know if they were that thrilled with us, but it was exciting, but just that it was exciting. And we went on a huge tour of Europe in '65. A thing that they could never do now. It was 3 months, and we went to Israel and France, Italy, Yugoslavia, Greece, Austria, the Netherlands, London. I mean, all different cities in Italy. And so, we didn't dance that much. We did Stars and things on the tour, not too many ballets. So we were out sightseeing, and when we were in Austria, it was the year of The Sound of Music. We rented a car and went up to the mountaintops in Salzburg and pretended we were, the Von Trapp family. And so we were young, but we had a lot of fun.
So in those early years when you were dancing these core roles, how involved was Balanchine in your rehearsals? Would he come in and be working with the corps that much?
He'd always come. Not in the beginning. We had ballet mistresses that were wonderful. Francia Russell was actually my ballet mistress, and Una Kai, and also Vita Brown, who we see around. She lives here, and she's just a wonderful. They were very nurturing and very motherly. Come on, Suzy, like that. And it was so. And then Mr. B would always come to the last couple of rehearsals.
So when did you start to kind of get your first soloist or
it's
your
hard
sort of
for
break?
me to remember exactly, but I think it might have been the first thing I might have done was, I learned Raimonda. I did Raimonda. It might have been, but before that, could have been first movement Demi in Symphony in C, and I thought this is like the hardest thing.
Still is, right?
It still is, but I remember being in Saratoga and having to, and requesting to be in this little practice room and just go over it and over it myself, because I thought that was a big deal. That was hard. Mm-hmm. It's harder than a lot of principal things I've ever done.
Did you have limited rehearsals in the way that I feel like I hear so much of now? Like, did you have to just go out there and do it, or did you guys have more time in that time?
I think we rehearsed a lot. Mm-hmm. It's just that we rehearsed more because there was less repertoire. So, if a ballet was coming up, we'd start working on it, not,
not
the
2
week
days
before maybe, because you'd have the season. And so you had a rehearsal period and you rehearse things for the season, but there weren't that many things to rehearse. So there weren't like fights about who gets the studio or.
So how did your promotion come about?
My promotion, 4 of us were promoted at the same time. It was my very dear closest friend, Suzy Hendel, who grew up with me at the school. And she's my oldest friend. Not oldest in years because we're the same age, but I mean, since we were 10 years old. And we're still friends. And Bruce Wells, who was also a soloist with me, and I danced with him a lot, and he was a teacher in Pacific Northwest Ballet, and Ricky Weiss. So it was Ricky and Bruce and Suzy and me. We were all promoted at the same time, and that was exciting. And we got our dressing room, and it was pretty thrilling. Yeah.
Did you guys have a feeling this was coming? Had you been dancing a lot of featured things, or just those kind of happened?
I don't think I had a feeling it was coming.
It just happened.
And it didn't happen the way now, it was a long time. It was like, about at least 9 years after I'd been in the company, because there was a roster of principals that were, unbelievable. I mean, the people I grew up watching dance, and they were there. And then there were a lot of soloists too that became promoted when I joined. A whole bunch of people were made soloists, and so it wasn't kind of like, okay, well, you've done this many roles, you'll be a soloist,
right? Because
you did solo roles when you were in the corps,
right,
and you did principal roles when you were in the corps, and it wasn't so much about the title, but it was nice.
I feel like now, like when people get promoted, there's often a lot of fanfare, like, oh, you got tricked into this fake photo shoot, or we give it to you after you do this star role. So do you remember what exactly happened? Because I know
absolutely do not remember.
Because I've heard stories about people just seeing their pay raise change and then having to go see, and they're like, oh, you got promoted. I was wondering if it was.
I don't remember. I really don't remember. I do remember that somebody came and did an article in the newspaper about us after I knew about it. It wasn't like surprise. But I don't remember exactly how it happened. Suzy might remember. Maybe she.
So what are some of your greatest personal memories working with Balanchine and dancing for him?
Just being in the room with him was, when I was very young, and we were all terrified, so, does he like me? Does he not like me? Because oftentimes when you get in and you're young, he leaves you alone. And you think like, I think I went through something like that for a while. And, but just when he was making something, a ballet, everybody was important to him. Didn't matter who you were. I mean, what part you were playing. It was, and big ballets. And I was lucky because in the 70s, everybody will argue that their time was his most prolific time. But I think like the late 60s and late 60s to late 70s was the time. I mean, the Stravinsky Festival and everything. But also, I was Harlequinade I was in originally. So many ballets. Well, Who Cares was really fun for me because he made a little solo for me and Richard Rapp too. It's wonderful. And the music had so much meaning for me because my mother, I told you, was a band singer. And so I knew the words to every song in Who Cares? Mr. B was really surprised. And I said, well, my mother was a singer. And I loved that music. But even a ballet like Tombeau was extraordinary because, the no principals. I mean, a lot of us in it were soloists, but we were just astounded, and you can't believe how fast he did it. And I always tell this story, like he'd do a step and dee-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you got to the point where you sort of knew what he was going to do next, because we were his pencils. But but he'd always say, he'd stop for a minute and then he'd say, let's see how it looks. And of course it always looked great, but I mean, he very, very rarely changed things. Sometimes things gave him a problem but I don't remember it so much with like large group things. I mean, Union Jack, you can't, and the older I got, the more, when you're in it, you don't appreciate it as much as when you stand back and look at it. Now when I stage ballets, and I stage ballets, A, that I was in, but B, the ones I wasn't in, they're like a miracle to me when I look at them and try and put them on. I mean, totally a miracle. And of course, Symphony in Three Movements, I was original in that, and it's indescribable, and it's sort of, you try to tell people, and there's really no word. You had to be there. But you sort of get a sense of it if you appreciate them the way I know you guys do. So,
can we talk about Symphony in Three for a second?
Sure.
Actually, because I'm so, obviously the Stravinsky Festival was just masterwork after masterwork, like flowing out of him, but you also had the time constraints, and that you guys you had to put it up so quickly with limited rehearsal. So how did you feel going into that premiere of Symphony in Three? Did you
it was one of those things, and people talk about it in history when Mr. B was, I think it was like Gounod and Agon and
Stars and
50, it was 57 stars, and he'd run from one room to the next. I wasn't in the company then, but people would say, now you go there now, and it was like that. I imagine I was only in Dances Concertantes he redid for us. It hadn't been done in years, and it was re-choreographed, so except for maybe the red pas de trois. But so I was in that and Symphony in Three, and I don't think I was in anything else that was being made. But so it was great because I remember my friend Suzy Hendel and I went out front, the night Duo premiered, and we hadn't seen a step. Mm-hmm. And our mouths were just on the floor, and we went back and we were crying. Mr. B, that was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. And he went, really, dear? Did you really like it? Duh. No, but because I guess, he didn't maybe have time to, sometimes I think he said, I really liked that ballet, but it's something like this that was such it's not a rush job, but I guess it is, fast production. So Symphony in 3, we liked it, but I liked what I did in it. But again, I didn't see the whole thing. And then when it was put together, and then it was on the stage, and that was a big surprise. People were just devastated when the curtain came down. I mean, like, what? But we had no idea it was going to be like that.
So outside of Balanchine, who would you say some of your greatest influences for your dancing were?
Well, dancers, and they were my friend. Well, Melissa, was my teacher and my mentor. And I when I was very young, I used to go watch her dance all the time because my girlfriend, who ended up being in the company with me, she lived in Manhattan. So when I was like 14, I would go sleep over at her house, and we'd go to the ballet. And of course, I've told this story recently a lot because we're doing Scotch Symphony this year. But my girlfriend was very in love with Eddie Villela, so we saw Prodigal Son. But the program was Prodigal Son, Sonnambula with Allegra, and Melissa and Jacques in Scotch. And I saw it so many times, and of course my friend wanted to be Allegra, and who wouldn't? But I wanted to be Melissa in Scotch, and nobody wanted to be Eddie, but she was in love with him in Prodigal. So I got to see things. But so Melissa, and of course Allegra Kent is everybody's dream person. And it turned out that she and I became very close friends when, and we still are, when I was very young. We just became close. And so she was a huge influence. And Patty McBride, I think, very specially was a big influence for me because I loved the way she moved, and she was a little closer in age to me, and we're still friends too. So, I mean, and then Violette, oh my goodness, these people, you merely had to look around the room. Violette was extraordinary, and you appreciate it so much now when at least we have some great films. Wish we had more, but there's not enough of Allegra. And Maria Tallchief was still dancing when I started, and she was so generous, very generous. I mean, she had this voice and she sounded very imposing, but she was very generous. Allegra will tell you they helped because the dancers helped each other a lot. I mean, the principals taught us roles. The ballet mistresses were mostly worked with the corps, but when it was unless it was Mr. B who taught it to you. So my teachers at the school were wonderful. I mean, and very, very good to me. And Dubrovska, to me, Madame Tchaikovsky, she was my first teacher when I was in 4th Division, and then I came back, and I taught here, and she one time, and we were very good friends, and I used to take her to doctor's appointments too, and she was so funny and adorable, and taught up until she was like 94. Wow. So, and Mr. Iglevsky was great. We loved our men teachers, and Mr. Iglevsky was, and who else? And Mr. Bukov and Vladimirov. I had great teachers.
So you were an original understudy for the Jerome Robbins Masterwork Dances at a Gathering. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well,
I always get the same reaction.
You can talk to me I'll talk about it. But the people who are actually not the understudies, by the time it went, nobody was that glad to be doing it. Maybe Eddie was, but because Jerry, and it's a it's my favorite Robbins ballet, along with Fawn. I think it's his masterpiece. But a lot of it, I think, had to do with the people he had in the room. And but he would change things, unlike Mr. B, who'd say, let's see how it looks. And Jerry, 1 minute it was this, and the next minute it was that. And it was 6 months. So, but again, I was young, and I was just thrilled to fill in for I learned everything, and somebody wasn't there, and I got to dance. So by the time it went, I think, and Gelsey Kirkland and I were the 2 understudies for them. We had to audition for it. It was a big audition to be the understudy. And by the time it actually went, I think we were the only 2 people that actually wanted to dance it. But it, the music was so great, and Jerry was very inspired. And it's not that he changed that much choreography, but he kept changing who was going to do what dances. And there's a famous story about, I wasn't in it the night it premiered, but pretty soon after, but nobody knew what dance was and the order of the dances and who was dancing what. And so there were signs all over the wings, like what comes next and who's in it. And so that was the big thing about dances. But the ballet itself was beautiful. And and at that time, Gordon Belsner, who was the most amazing pianist there ever was in terms of ballet, as far as I'm concerned. And because he was like a dancer in his being, and Mr. B created all the ballets with Gordon, all when I was there, with Gordon playing. And so when he would play dances, it was like you knew Gordon was playing and he was dancing with it. It was so exciting to dance, I thought.
So which sections in Dances at a Gathering were you learning? Because now I feel like things have kind of become very cohesive. The blue girl does this, the green girl does this. But
well, when I was an understudy, I learned everything except I didn't really learn pink, except that at some point I didn't learn the pas de deux, like the scherzo pas de deux, or one of my favorite dances is the Etudes pas de deux. I love that. But I learned everything else. I learned all of purple. And purple was purple, but then yellow was blue, and blue was green. I didn't learn green either, no. But I learned everything else. And I ended up doing, sometimes we would mix and match. I ended up doing some of yellow mixed with blue and pink and the 3 girls. And so that's what happened.
So it's so interesting for me to think that for those of you who were there for the original creation of these works, to see them now perform today. What do you feel when you watch them? Do you see things that have changed and evolved? And
well, yeah. I mean, obviously, everything, Violette, I loved Violette so much. She was the smartest person. And one day, after she had this movie that this French director made of her coaching all these people in her roles, and so they showed it at the Lincoln Center thing here, and afterwards somebody, there were questions, and some man got up and asked her the same question you just asked me, and she said, "Don't be afraid of change. Change is good." And that was it. And I think that's what I would say to you. Everything changes. So in my own mind, I have things the way I remember them. At least my mind is still good. And when I teach things, I like to teach them the way I remember them looking, or the way it felt to do it. And then if it changes, that's life.
We will return to Conversations on Dance in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor, Dancewear Corner. Are you sick of wearing the same old in the studios every day, but just don't want to spend hundreds of dollars for just a few items? Well, at Dancewear Corner, you can freshen up your look for a fraction of the price you may think. They carry all of the major brands, including body wrappers, Block, Morella, Capezio, Sodanza, and so many others. They even just stocked up on the Zarelli tights we have told you about in the past here on Conversations on Dance. So why wait? Click over to dancewearcorner.com now to freshen up your look for the new season or the new school year. And if you're in the Orlando area, check out their huge superstore.
So at what point did you know that you had a talent for teaching, and how did you transition into that role?
Well, it's interesting because I never wanted, when I was very young, Mr. B knew people that sort of got it. And when I was very young, I think maybe 19 or something like that, he told my girlfriend that, I was going to be he would always say to us, oh, you're going to teach one day, you're going to teach one day. But he told my girlfriend that I was going to be a very good teacher. And I just completely freaked out. And I thought, he doesn't want me to dance. I want to dance. Well, of course, dear, you're going to dance, but you'll teach one day. And then sort of and then I did teach sometimes in my later 20s. Sometimes I would substitute here at the school. And like B2 on up. And then at one point, right after I had been injured for a long time, I had a bad back injury in 1976 or 77. And so I had just come back, and then Mr. B said to me, because Karen van Arldingen and Kay Mesa were teaching little children here. And he asked me, Karen she couldn't do it anymore. She had too much repertoire. And so he asked me if I would do it. And I said, I was so crazy, but I said, Mr. B, I really don't think that I would be the best teaching little children how to dance. I think that what I could do better is teaching older kids. I don't think I'm really be good at that. And he said, okay, dear. But I was thinking, oh my gosh, she wants me to retire and not dance anymore. And I just came back and I want to dance. So that was that. And then as it happened, let's see, 70. So, but for the next 2 years, I'd been out a long time and I wasn't dancing so much. And it became apparent I wasn't going to dance much more things other than what I was already doing, and a little less and less. But, I'd already been in the company 17 years. So eventually I got pregnant. I was married and I got pregnant, or I wasn't married yet, but I was going to be. And so I had a baby and my daughter Hallie, and I didn't go back. And in those days, you didn't go back unless you were a principal, which I wasn't. I was a soloist. And, he'd pretty much had it with me, I guess. I mean, yeah, people want to see the next people go on, and even though it was hard to face at that time. So, okay, so I had my children, and then... But what I found out in that time was, and Mr. B eventually, he died in 83. So, and I stopped at the end of 79. So, and I worked on a couple of shows. I worked on Your Toes with Mr. B, actually, until he wasn't able to do it. And with Peter and Carousel. Peter did a Carousel in Washington, D.C., But I wasn't teaching. Melissa Hayden had me teach. She had a school on Broadway, and she had me teach. And I staged some stuff, but I wasn't actually teaching. What I found out is that the Russians were furious at me for saying that I did not want to teach little children how to dance out of context. They were they did not, and Peter wanted me to go to the school, and they did not want me to go to the school. And so that, but I wasn't dying to go then. But then, then I think in 1986, Kay Mazo had to be out for a while. And so Peter eventually talked them into taking me back into the fold. The prodigal daughter came home. And so that's when I started to teach. But, you don't know, of course you get better at it. But the funny thing about it was, because it wasn't like my ambition to be, I was like afraid to be marked teacher before I was done dancing, how much you absorbed and how the words, the pictures, and how it just comes out of you completely unaware of, what I had absorbed from my years in the New York City Ballet, and hearing Mr. B and hearing his words, with his accent in my head. So that was interesting.
So being a teacher is obviously completely different in the classroom setting than being a student or taking a class. And it's one thing that, as Michael and I teach sometimes, it's a challenge to kind of take on a different role, and you have these different responsibilities. So what was it like for you to start transferring into that? And what were kind of like the tricks that helped you start right away?
I think when you're a dancer, and also a dancer and also a mother, and having been a young dancer and sensitive and worried, and also a sense of humor, because Mr. B was so funny. He was so clever and so funny, and the stories and the analogies and the play on words, the puns, and he used to teach on Mondays. I was exhausted, but I just didn't want to miss any of the stories. That's because it was so interesting. It was so fascinating, the class. But so I think a sense of humor, to be able to laugh at yourself and be and also, I'll tell you, it's very important to let them know that you're on their side and be critical. Because what happens is young people get, oh, she hates me. That's the only way you can get somebody not to hate you, but not that you hate them, but to make them do it. Mr. B used to make us do it alone over and over again in the class in front of everybody until we got it, because that's the only way you get better. Mm-hmm. And so just, but the feeling that you're on their side, and the reason you're being so hard on them is not because you want to make them miserable. It's because you want to make them the best they can be before they leave you.
So obviously, your class is very influenced by your experience with Balanchine, but I wonder if you don't also incorporate what you learned under the Russians when you were in the school somewhat. Sometimes I think I don't enough. I get so immersed in like the timing and the footwork and the port de bras and how the things are supposed to be. But I teach older kids, so it's okay, because it's like the refinement and the icing on the cake. Sometimes I don't even get to a big jump, which to me was fantastic at, and it really evolves from the ballets. It's and what it takes to do these ballets well. But it's all, tendus, my God, thousands of tendus pulling the toe back. But on point,
it's quite a thing and I think our school really maintains that, how to place your feet. I mean, it's paramount for women and men too. You can't just slap your feet around, and the beauty of the port de bras and the speed of the glissade and the deep plie without, slapping your heels down on the floor. And it's a look, how it looks. That's the big deal.
So, I feel like I could be wrong here, but I think that many schools in America, at least, don't ask that students train at bar on point. Why is that such an important element?
It's very important. From the time I was 13 in B class, but we wore D shanks because there is nothing that you get from a ballet shoe like trying to point your foot in a point shoe. And he didn't want us to wear new point shoes. I mean, I get mad at the girls when they come in new point shoes. But the D shanks were just so that the tip knows that it's being pointed. And that's the thing it went away for a while. And now I think they don't do it now, but they have more point classes at younger ages now than we had. We just had 15 minutes in fourth division on 3 times a week. I mean, it was crazy. What's really funny is that Madame Gleboff, who also became such a dear friend of mine, the wisest woman that there ever was in the world, she always used to say that I was the only person that ever got into the company from late C. Because the year before I got into the company, I think I was taking like 4 or 5 classes a week, period. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's why I lasted so long. Because, there weren't workshops. We didn't have anything. There weren't workshops, choreographic this. There was nothing. There was like class and the Long Island Railroad and homework on the train. That's all there was.
So you still come in and teach class every day in point shoes. Why is that so important to you?
Well, it's a little selfish and a little not, and I do a lot less than I used to. Right now my foot's a little injured, so I'm doing even less, but I'm hoping that will go away. But I just never stopped. First of all, I don't like the feel of ballet shoes on the floor. And second of all, I just never stopped. So it's sort of a personal thing. I feel like, like the witch and the Wizard of Oz. If I take them off, it'll be like, I'm melting. It'll be all over. It'll be over forever. And I do take them off, like we have 6 weeks off in the summer and I don't put them on. And then after Labor Day, I go in and I say, is this still going to work? And yeah, okay, we'll do another year. I do think it's helpful to the girls because also, even though I can't, do what I used to be able to do, I sort of know what it feels like to go up and down and what things you have to use and what's helpful and what's not helpful and what a susu is supposed to look like in point shoes, because you can say what it's supposed to look like in ballet shoes, but it's different. So I think it's, in addition to all the other wonderful teachers they have, I think it's helpful and it makes me feel good. I do it instead of having a facelift.
Is there one element to your teaching style that you feel like has really evolved over the years that you've really honed to make it the most effective?
It's hard to know, it's just like, is there one wrinkle that I didn't notice like last year that's here this year? It's such a long time. It's now 30 years. This is my 30th year teaching. So I'm sure I have changed, but I still, I look at my first workshops that I put on and I still want it to look the same. So I don't think it's completely changed, or not much.
What element in our generation's interpretations of Balanchine's works do you think is most missing?
Well, tempo. Sometimes, I mean, you see, the tempo was paramount. And often there's this joke about Mr. B that, he would stand in the front wing always. I mean, he did. That wasn't the joke. And lean on and someday and look down and one day somebody said to him, Mr. Balanchine, why aren't you watching the ballet? And he was tapping his foot and he said, you know what? If the tempo was right, I don't have to watch it. And that's really true. And that's how I feel. When the music's wrong, it can't be right because he was music. That's the thing about going into the room with him. It's like the assimilation of architecture and music and the steps in one thing. I mean, it was like he built a building in, it's so architecturally perfect with the music, but part of it is because he saw the notes on the page in his head, made the people be like that without even thinking about it. So, I mean, it's, so there's that. And so because of that, and maybe the plie, and also we weren't as interested in turnout as people seem to be today. From the ankle down, absolutely. How you place your toe in the floor, absolutely. And being forward, because, he would say, it's show business, dear. It's for the public. So when your face and your chest is not in front of your, hips, but that doesn't mean you stick your hips out in the back. It's just the front part is what you're performing for people. They paid money, to not see you be turned out. And so it was a little more show businessy in that sense. And so I think maybe that. I mean, the austerity of it. Mr. B was so normal. He liked ironing. He would iron to relax him. He loved to iron his shirts, ironed his own shirts. And he was so much more normal. There was nothing pretentious about him. And so dancing was more normal.
Right. What do you think is the most important thing our generation can do to continue to preserve his legacy?
Your generation. Listen to us. What can I say?
That's the best answer. That's great.
So for our last little go around, we like to do what we call a lightning round, where we just ask a short question, we get a short answer. It's not a trick, and we're not trying to trip you up. So it's should be relatively easy.
You can turn the mic off if you don't like it.
So the first question is favorite ballet to dance.
I knew you were going to say that. I imagine Serenade, and there were so many, but I did love doing the Russian Girl and Serenade.
Favorite ballet to watch?
Oh, there's so many, for so many reasons. I mean, Liebeslieder is not everybody's, but I love Liebeslieder, but I love Liebeslieder when Violette and Patty and Jelana and and Suzanne were in it.
Most memorable on-stage moment?
Oh, gosh. Oh, well, I did break my foot in the Russian dance in Serenade. I got thrown in. It was my first performance. I got thrown in. It was the last day of the season, and I had been rehearsing Stars Pas de Deux upstairs to go on a lecture with Helgi Thomason to Iceland. And I was doing over and over again the final thing in Stars on this very soft shoe. And then I had understudied it, but I'd never danced it. And then everybody was out. And so, Suzy, can you do it? Yes, of course. So I kept the same shoes on, and I went down and I did it. And when the famous step, the changement with the split jump, and came down, I heard a pop. It had never happened to me before in my life. Pop. And then I finished the ballet, and then I could not walk. And I remember Mr. B was so mad at me because I had to replace somebody else in a demi and symphony in C. And I said, Mr. B, I can't walk. And he said, what do you mean you can't walk? You just did serenade. I said, no, really. And that was the longest foot injury I ever had, because we didn't have MRIs, and it wasn't so much a fracture, but I had, either overstretched or torn ligaments in the, between the first metatarsal, and it took a year to really heal. I mean, I came back and then I redid it, and so it was in the old days when they didn't have MRIs, and you just got rested.
What's your favorite correction to give?
I have so many. I
You can give us a couple.
Well, be forward. Forward, forward, forward. Forward, forward, forward. I think that's my favorite correction. Forward with the face, lead with your nose. Bend your elbows, bend your knees. That's more than one.
Okay, if you could come back to the stage tomorrow and dance one role, what would it be?
Oh, Liebeslieder.
Okay. Well, that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Suzy, for joining.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us this week on Conversations on Dance. Follow us now on social media at Conversations on Dance, and subscribe now on iTunes so that you will automatically be notified when a new episode goes live. Thanks for joining us this week on Conversations on Dance.